The winter storm raged outside as a family settled in for the night. Suddenly, they heard a sound. Something was beneath their house. Something strange breathed heavily below. The father grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the freezing porch. He knelt to check beneath the house, choking on the ice-cold air. Two glowing eyes stared back at him. A deep, rumbling growl sent a chill down his spine. Just when he thought things couldn't get any more terrifying, they made a shocking discovery. Home sweet home. While the wind howled outside, rattling the old wooden house and snow hurled itself against the windows, the Parker family giggled together in their living room. The storm was just a distant threat from which their home protected them. The windows were shut, fire blazed in the fireplace, and the room smelled of hot cocoa and cinnamon-scented candles. Lily was curled up on a couch, wrapped in a thick quilt. Claire, her mother, sat beside her, nursing a mug of tea. Matthew Parker, her father, had his legs stretched out in his recliner, sipping his coffee. Despite the storm raging outside, everything was calm and peaceful. Out of nowhere their peace was abruptly disturbed, and it wasn't the crack of the thunder. Well, what do you think happened? An ominous sound, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching beneath the floorboards. Matthew's fingers froze around his mug. The sound was so light that, for a moment, he thought he had imagined it. But then it came again. Scratch, scratch. Lily sat up straighter. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Claire set her mug down. "Probably just the wind." Matthew was not so sure, but he didn't want to scare Lily, so he nodded and sipped his coffee again. The room fell silent as they all listened for the sound. Just as Matthew parted his lips to speak, a massive thud filled the room like thunder. The loud thud was unmistakable. This was not a soft thump like a branch of a tree hitting the house. This was heavier. Matthew jumped to his feet when he heard deep, heavy breathing. Was it a raccoon, he wondered. It wouldn't be the first time a family of raccoons got stuck underneath their wooden house. But what if it was something else? He sprang up. "Stay here," he murmured. "Are you sure?" his wife asked, rising too. Matthew patted her hand. "It's probably just an animal taking shelter from the storm." "Like a raccoon?" Lily asked. "Or a strayed dog?" Matthew grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter. "I'll just take a quick look," he assured them. He pulled on his coat and braced himself as he moved to the door. "What do you think will happen? Do you think it is only a raccoon?" The cold hit him like a punch as he stepped on the porch. Snowflakes swirled in front of him, and the wind whipped against his face. It was too heavy a storm for him to leave the porch, so he decided to peep through the wooden logs on the porch. Matthew clicked on the flashlight. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness as he crouched down, but he angled it beneath the porch and peeped. The beam cut through the shadows underneath the house, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw nothing but the frost-covered beams and a few cobwebs. Then his light caught something, and his breath caught. What do you think he saw? Matthew bent again to confirm his eyes were not playing tricks on him, but what he saw didn't change. Two glowing eyes stared at him in the dark. They glowed, reflecting the light like twin embers in the dark. These were not the quick, darting eyes of a raccoon or the cautious glint of a coyote, but something else, something bigger, large and unmoving. Matthew's heart began to beat faster. He adjusted the beam, but the eyes did not go away. Something happened that sent chills down Matthew's spine. The animal growled. It was a deep, rumbling growl that cut into the air. It was a low, threatening warning. A shocking realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There was a bear under his house. He jumped up immediately and nearly slipped on the eaz. He ran back into the house. But the growl followed him, vibrating through the ground. He barely managed to slam the door shut before releasing the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Claire was already by his side. "Matt?" He pressed his back against the door, breathing fast. "It was not a raccoon," he said. "What is it?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. Matthew swallowed hard. "It's a bear." The color in Claire's face drained away, and Lily clutched her rabbit so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "A bear? As in, a big bear?" "Massive, Matthew said grimly. Another growl rumbled beneath them, as if in confirmation. Claire stumbled to find a seat, and Matthew left the door, forcing himself to think. Bears never came around this time of year, so what was one doing beneath his house? "Is it trapped?" Claire asked with a trembling voice. Matthew shook his head. "I don't think so. Maybe it's sheltering from the storm." Claire exhaled sharply. Okay, so we should call someone. Wildlife Services. They will—" Matthew was already reaching for his phone, so he looked up at her and showed her the phone. No signal. Her stomach dropped. "Storm must have knocked the tower out," Matthew muttered. Claire blinked. "Matt, there is a bear under our house," she whispered. Suddenly, another sound drifted up from the floorboards, but this one was different. It was not a growl. It was something softer. Matthew frowned. He turned, knelt beside the floorboards, and pressed his ear closer. The sound came again, and he heard it clearly. It was a soft whimper. His brow furrowed. That couldn't have come from the bear. The whimper was followed by a tiny, high-pitched cry. Matthew looked up at his family, his eyes wide. "What is it?" Claire asked, getting up again. Matthew exhaled slowly. I think there is something with her." "Something?" Claire asked. Matthew grabbed the flashlight and walked out again. He dropped to his knees and peeped. The golden eyes looked back at him again, but he allowed his flashlight to brush past it. Then he saw it. What do you think he saw? There, nestled against her belly, were tiny figures, 2 of them. They were small and barely bigger than a house cat, and they had curled into the warmth of the bear's thick fur. Tiny bear cubs. Matthew swallowed hard and slowly backed away. The bear's golden eyes followed him, not with aggression, but with a warning. "Leave us be!" Matthew swallowed hard. He turned and hurried inside and shut the door firmly. Claire and Lily looked up immediately, their eyes brimming with questions. Claire spoke first. "What did you see?" Matthew waited for a beat before delivering the news. "She has cubs." Lily gasped and pressed her hands to her mouth. Claire's lips parted, her earlier fear melting into something else, something softer. Lily's eyes widened too. "Baby bears?" Matthew nodded. "They definitely needed shelter from the storm. She's protecting them. They must have lost their den in the storm." The revelation shifted something in the room. The panic was still there, but beneath it was something else. Pity. The mother bear wasn't there to attack. She was there because she had nowhere else to go. But then a loud creak split the air, and the family froze. The mother bear had shifted, and her massive weight made the house groan in protest. Matthew's mind raced. This mama bear could tear down their entire house. He had to figure something out fast. With no easy answers, they called wildlife experts for help. "We can't leave them here," he told his family. But forcing her out in the middle of a storm could mean death for the cubs, Claire pointed out. "Those cubs won't survive the cold if we drive them away." "But what if she doesn't leave? What if she decides this is her new home?" Lily asked. "She won't." Matthew's voice was steady, but the truth was he wasn't sure. "Did she look scared?" Lily asked again. Matthew hesitated. The bear had been alert and tense, but not scared. "A little bit," he answered. She clutched her stuffed rabbit to her chest. "What do we do?" Claire ran a hand through her hair. "We need to call someone. We have to try. I'll go get the landline." The landline worked, surprisingly, and 30 minutes later, the wind carried the sound of approaching engines. The storm had not relented, but the wind had eased enough for the wildlife team to make the dangerous drive to their house. They were bundled in thick coats, and their faces looked calm, too calm for people who had to drive through a snowstorm. Matthew met them outside wearing a thick coat. Claire stood behind him on the porch, rubbing her hands together nervously. The lead expert, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Russell Quinn, stepped out first. Beside him was a younger man named Nate, who carried a case of tranquilizer darts. A third expert, a woman named Jen, adjusted the straps on a heavy-duty truck. Matthew got to business immediately. "She's still under there. There are 2 cubs with her." Russell nodded as he pulled his hood tighter against the cold. "If she's got cubs, she won't be easy to move." "We know," Claire said, and wrapped her arms tightly around herself. "But we can't just leave them there. Matthew thinks they might hurt the house." "And he is right," Russell nodded. "Don't worry. Relocation will be tricky in this weather, but we'll get her out. The plan is simple. We will sedate her, move her and the cubs into the carrier, and transport them to a safer location." Matthew and Claire exchanged glances. It sounded reasonable, straightforward. The men got to work. They moved with careful precision and crouched to their knees. The bear growled again, but the men didn't look scared. They had heard worse. Nate aimed at the tranquilizer and took a shot. "Bingo!" he said when it hit its mark. Then he aimed at the cubs too. When he had sedated all three, he looked up and smiled. But the mama bear still stood her ground. The mother bear was a large animal, so the tranquilizer only made her weak and a little limp, nothing more. The men got to work and tried to drag her out, but she wouldn't budge. "I think she's staying still on purpose," Jen yelled, breathing hard. They had tied some ropes on the bear, and the three of them tried to pull her out. They couldn't use the tractor as they didn't want to hurt her, but the bear was not making it easy. So they left her and took her cubs out. They could tell by how she stared at them each time they grabbed a cub, even though weakly, that she was furious. They tensed, ready to run if she managed to beat the sedation and intervene. But she couldn't. She let out a deep growl and snarled at them. She looked so angry, and Claire felt so much pity for her. She wondered what she would do if she ever had to watch people take Lily away from her. When the two cubs had been moved and put in warm cages, they returned to the mother again. They expected her to move easily now they had her cubs, but she still didn't. She looked sadder now and growled at intervals, but she refused to let them take her. Instead, she hoisted her body to a spot stubbornly. From time to time, her golden eyes flickered between the rescuers and then toward the bushes. Suddenly, she gave out another low sound. This one wasn't a growl. It sounded more like a cry from deep within her. Matthew felt uneasy immediately. He was a farmer who owned a few animals, and he could tell when an animal was trying to say something. "Wait!" He stopped the team. They stopped pulling and turned to him. "Look at her closely. Why does she keep watching the bushes?" They all paused and considered. "Perhaps there is something there," Claire pointed out. They looked down at the bear again. "If she's here, then her den must have collapsed," Russell thought fast, and then he blinked. "You are right. We have to find her den." The team did not ask questions. Russell was quite experienced, and they trusted his instincts. They grabbed flashlights and some objects for defense and marched into the bushes with him. Matthew followed too, but Claire ran back into the house to stay with Lily. It didn't take long for them to find the collapsed den. Snow and broken branches had turned it into a wreckage. Matthew's breath misted in the cold as he stared at it. That den has once housed a small bear family. Losing a home was as sad for animals as it was for humans, especially for a mother bear with small cubs to protect. He watched Jen plunge into the rubble, following Russell's instructions, and begin to dig. She and Nate pulled away chunks of shattered wood, searching for something. They didn't know what they were searching for, but Russell insisted they dig faster. "We might be too late," he whispered suddenly, and Matthew's eyes finally rounded in understanding. "You think there is another down there?" Russell shrugged. Why else would she be watching the bushes? Matthew felt alarmed as the implications sunk into him. He moved immediately to help them in the search. He shoved away debris as fast as he could. The snow was frozen in clumps, and his fingers went numb almost immediately, but he did not stop. "Do you think they will find anything?" Jen moved to the last untouched part of the rubble. Then her hands froze. Matthew saw it before she even spoke. He saw a flicker of movement. Then, just as she dug deeper, they all heard it. A tiny, weak cry. Jen's voice was hushed. "Oh, God, there's another one." Matthew's heart slammed against his ribs. The mother bear hadn't been refusing to leave out of stubbornness or fear. She had lost a third cub and had hoped it would run out of the bushes to her. She had been waiting. Jen worked fast. "Dig fast," Russell urged her, and she did. She dug into the snow quickly, clearing away every last bit of snow and debris before drawing the cub out. The cub was small, too small, and it wasn't moving much. Its fur was soaked, and its body curled tightly. For a heartbeat, they thought they were too late. Then the cub stirred weakly and let out a faint sound. Matthew and the team exhaled in relief. "She must have given birth recently," Russell murmured, as he scooped the cub away from Jen and put it in his thick jacket. Then he exhaled sharply. "We need to move. Now!" They returned with the bear and went straight to its mother. The bear from his jacket so the mother bear could see. Her reaction was immediate. Her eyes shone, and she let out a weak but very loud and excited cry. She tried to get up too and crawl out from under the house herself, but she was too sedated, so she slammed back again. Claire ran out with Lily, and they gasped when they saw the smaller cub. Lily beamed at them. "You saved her baby cub." Beneath the house, the mother bear continued to howl happily. Russell gave the order, and the team grabbed the ropes again and began to pull. They didn't even have to do much this time. The bear practically slid out of the house, and they all lifted her to the base of the truck, where her other cubs waited in thick, blanketed cages. Russell moved to her with her baby. Everyone tensed, and the fingers of the team twitched near their equipment, ready to react. But the bear didn't lunge. She didn't growl. No one spoke. No one moved. The mother inched closer, her movements sluggish, as the effects of the tranquilizer still dulled her. And then, at last, slowly but carefully, Russell placed the smaller cub between her arms. It gave a weak, tiny cry, shifting its limbs, trying to move. The mother bear lowered her massive head and nudged the tiny body with her nose. A deep, guttural sound rumbled from her chest. She hugged and licked it thoroughly. She cooed and hummed, and all the humans around fought back tears. There was really nothing like the love a mother had for her child. She had been waiting, through the storm, through fear, through the strange presence of humans so close to her and her cubs. She had been waiting. She had spent her life in that forest, had built her home in it, had raised her cubs beneath its shelter. And when that home was torn away, when the earth collapsed, and the storm swallowed her den and her little cub, she had not run. She had come here with her other cubs and waited, hoping. Her deep-set eyes flickered toward Matthew and Claire, then to Russell, Jen, and Nate. She looked at them with what looked like gratefulness. "She is not angry," Claire pointed out. "She knows we helped." But it wasn't over yet. "We have to get that cub to help, or it might not survive," Russell told the small family as his team jumped into the truck. Time was running out. They pulled away, and the family waved after them. Matthew turned to see Claire crying, and they hugged each other. "Do you think the cub will be okay?" Claire asked. Matthew did not know, but he nodded. When Matthew, Claire, and Lily visited the very next morning, it had been treated and placed in a warm incubator beside his mother. The incubator was to chase whatever cold had remained in its body. A week later, the cub was released, and the bears returned to the thick, unforgiving forest. Matthew and Claire heard about it and hoped they would be fine, but they never forgot. Matthew still found himself staring at the porch sometimes, remembering the way his breath had frozen in his throat when he first saw those glowing eyes in the dark. Claire still flinched at small noises beneath the house. Lily never forgot the little cub in Russell's arms. But they also never forgot the waiting eyes of the mother bear. Then, one day, Russell called. A ranger spotted bears moving west, 3 cubs. Matthew closed his eyes and smiled deeply. North of the ridge, Russell continued, they looked good, strong. Matthew nodded happily. Alive, strong. They had made it against all odds. She had made it. As he hung up, he turned toward the window, staring out into the stretch of land beyond their home. Somewhere out there, a mother bear and her cubs were moving forward, together. This story reminds us that there is no force on the planet as strong as a mother's love for her babies. It also reminds us to render some help to animals in distress. And if you thought this was sad, wait until you hear about the dog that refused to leave a hospital room because he knew something no one else did.